At 3:00 the morning on the 2nd of February, 1502, a piercing cry echoed through the stone corridors of the Este castle. It was not a wail of terror, nor of excruciating pain, but something profoundly more disquieting, a sound laden with the weight of destiny. The guards averted their gazes in solemn silence, while diplomats and courtiers shared uneasy looks, each acutely conscious that the echoes they heard were not mere expressions of ardor, but the execution of the most perilous and clandestine rite of authority in Renaissance Europe. On that frigid dawn, as Ferrara lay dormant beneath a crimson moon casting an ominous glow, an occurrence transpired within the ducal chambers that would irrevocably shift the equilibrium of Italian affairs, an event so profoundly personal, yet so meticulously calculated, that official records concealed it for nearly 5 centuries. When those documents finally emerged, they unveiled how a two-year-old woman wielded her very form as the most formidable instrument of statecraft her era had witnessed. Envision a royal bedchamber where every breath and every murmur is valued as precious coinage, where a woman's body serves as the arena of conflict, and the consummation of matrimony is performed not as an act of tender affection, but as a formalized campaign with the potential to dismantle lineages and forge dominions. What you are on the verge of discovering transcends a mere tale of a notorious bridal eve. It is the disclosure of a diplomatic ceremony so veiled and so explicitly carnal that it languished in Europe's most guarded repositories for generations. This is the account of how Lucrezia Borgia, offspring of a pontiff, and twice bereaved by politically orchestrated slayings, evolved from a vulnerable pawn into a formidable hunter. How a single evening of meticulously scrutinized intimacy laid the foundation for an enduring dynasty, an evening alluded to in hushed tones, akin to 3 solemn words conveyed by a royal envoy sufficient to illuminate why this woman, both revered and reviled, indelibly molded Italy's fate. Prepare yourself. The events that unfolded before daybreak will dismantle all preconceptions you hold regarding desire, dominion, and governance in the Renaissance. If this fleeting insight into history's sequestered sanctums has quickened your pulse, contemplate the revelations yet to come. Extend your approval to this presentation if you desire us to continue excavating the obscured ceremonies that reforged empires. In the discourse below, nominate the queen, duchess, or courtesan whose most shadowed enigmas you wish unveiled. The figure most frequently invoked shall feature in our forthcoming inquiry. Enroll in our fellowship and activate notifications, for these verities are disclosed solely to those bold enough to partake in our concealed fraternity. The annum was 1502, the zenith of Borgia ascendancy. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, had consolidated dominion over Italy via matrimonial bonds that rendered his progeny as instruments upon the geopolitical tableau. Amid this turbulent epoch, Lucrezia transcended the role of a mere aristocratic consort. She personified the essence of erotic statecraft. Italy stood fragmented among contending sovereignties, where each aristocratic alliance operated as a pact, every nuptial couch a theatre of strife. The realms of Ferrara, Milan, Naples, and the Papal States were tenuously united by precarious coalitions consummated amid silken linens. Matrimony in this realm was devoid of romance. It was a matter of endurance. For the Este lineage of Ferrara, the perils were existential. The sovereign Duke Ercole had wagered his house's posterity on this pact with the Borgias. His progeny and successor, Alfonso d'Este, would serve as the corporeal embodiment of that venture. Deliberations culminated on the 30th of December 1501, with stipulations that laid bare the profoundly mercenary nature of this union. Lucrezia's endowment comprised 100,000 golden ducats, a sum capable of sustaining metropolises for an entire cycle. Nevertheless, the authentic cost of this accord would be quantified not in aureate wealth, but in corporeal surrender upon the bridal night. Chronicles from the era attest to covert protocols devised to authenticate noble mergers. Consummation was never a secluded affair. It necessitated formal observers and attestation, for the authenticity of the entire lineage hinged upon it. The inaugural night of wedlock evolved into a semi-public spectacle, wherein the bedroom's resolution dictated the trajectories of realms. The designated occasion, the 2nd of February, was deliberately selected. It coincided with the Feast of the Purification of the Virgin, a hallowed observance in the Catholic calendar. By synchronizing the nuptial rites with this sanctified event, The Borgias and Estes amalgamated the celestial with the terrestrial, rendering this consummation not merely a physical union but a ceremonial consecration of lineage. Lucrezia arrived in Ferrara, bearing the burdens of two calamitous prior alliances. At 22, her allure, portrayed by the bard Pietro Bembo as ethereal and radiant, was matched solely by her tarnished notoriety. Her initial spouse, Giovanni Sforza, had absconded following accusations of incapacity. Her subsequent, Alfonso of Aragon, met his end by asphyxiation within Vatican precincts, a casualty of ecclesiastical machinations. This bride was far from ingenuous. She was a resilient figure, fortified by acumen, allure, and a perilous proficiency in transmuting frailty into fortitude. Her prospective consort could scarcely have been more antithetical. Alfonso d'Este, aged 25, was a warrior, an inventor, and a craftsman who moulded his own ordnance with unyielding resolve. In contrast to the effete sycophants of rival Italian courts, Alfonso exuded authority without ostentation. He performed melodies with grace, engineered armaments with exactitude, and epitomized the vigor of a combatant alongside the sophistication of a Renaissance sovereign. The convergence of these two personas, Lucrezia, honed through allure as a tool, and Alfonso incarnating unrefined yet pragmatic, might establish the backdrop for one of the era's most volatile mergers. The unanticipated rendezvous at Bentivoglio on January 3 had already altered the course. In that secluded interchange, Lucrezia and Alfonso unearthed a flicker of genuine affinity, an element unforeseen by schemers, and one that would infuse the impersonal computations of state strategy with unforeseen complexity. What was intended as a ceremonial enactment now pulsed with veritable fervor, endowing the impending night with a fervor beyond the grasp of ecclesiastical or sovereign decree. On the 1st of February, Ferrara metamorphosed into a grand arena. The majestic cavalcade that conveyed Lucrezia into the municipality was orchestrated as a prelude to the authentic drama destined to transpire behind sealed portals. Denizens acclaimed her passage, attired in a French robe edged with ermine, a collar of diamonds and rubies refracting the wintry radiance. Yet as the populace exulted, a clandestine tableau was already in preparation. Within the palace's passageways, informants and chroniclers stationed themselves to chronicle the minutest particulars of the forthcoming events. Foremost among them was Isabella d'Este's designated envoy, dispatched by the Duchess, a formidable adversary intent on converting the most private of evenings into actionable intelligence. This was no fortuity. It constituted surveillance, a premeditated endeavor to amass evidence that could subsequently be deployed in the ruthless arena of Italian statecraft. The date itself imbued an additional stratum of allegory. On the 2nd of February, the feast of the Purification of the Virgin Mary presented a profound irony, intertwining purity with sensuality, the hallowed intersecting with the earthly. No aspect of this chronology was haphazard. Each motion, each observance, had been contrived to elevate the consummation into a lineage sacrament, uniting not merely two forms, but two illustrious dynasties. Within the ducal suites, the scene was meticulously arranged. Scarlet velvet draperies enveloped the bed akin to theatrical veils. Argent candelabra cast flickering shadows upon Flemish weavings, illustrating conflicts and pacts, a poignant reminder of the true imperatives. Here, in a chamber transfigured into both refuge and podium, the decade's paramount political enactment was poised to commence. When Alfonso arrived, both he and Lucrezia comprehended their assigned parts. Their encounter at Bentivoglio had already kindled an authentic bond between them. But now, that ember required channeling and exhibition as substantiation. What ensued was not a mere secluded deed. It was a rite entrenched in centuries of noble tradition. For exalted unions in Europe, consummation surpassed mere closeness. It constituted an attestation of validity, a compulsory act affirming the potential for progeny, the fortification of coalitions, the perpetuation of bloodlines. Yet in Renaissance Italy, verification demanded spectators muted, concealed, yet attendant. The regal bed transmogrified into a tribunal, the expression of affection, a judgment that would adjudicate the prospects of nations. Lucrezia, tempered by two ruinous unions, grasped this more profoundly than any. Giovanni Sforza's inadequacy had devolved into communal disgrace and dissolution. Alfonso of Aragon's demise by throttling in Vatican halls had demonstrated that frailty in the matrimonial sphere equated to vulnerability in governance. and such vulnerability could culminate in lethality. These teachings molded her approach. She would cease to be a mere instrument. She would endure, nay, prevail, by converting her physique into an armament. Alfonso likewise apprehended the exigencies. His potency was renowned, yet renown sufficed not. It necessitated demonstration, inscription, observation. The Este clan could ill afford murmurs of debility or barrenness. To safeguard authenticity, the rite mandated multiple consummations. Each instance would be inscribed as incontrovertible testimony, a bulwark against dissolutions, controversies, or conspiracies of elimination. Thus, the evening commenced. The initial consummation bore an unforeseen intensity. Authentic ardor intermingled with political imperative, yielding a vitality that astonished even the participants. For this moment, obligation and yearning converged. This merger was not solely contrived, it was experienced. The subsequent consummation, chronicled by Isabella d'Este's infiltrated envoy, illustrated the meticulous scrutiny applied to every instant. To external observers, this might appear as an encroachment, but within courtly perspectives, it was obligation. The bedchamber merely extended the negotiation chamber, and every exhalation and utterance constituted political deposition. The third and concluding act consummated the rite. It transcended the mere linkage of two souls. It forged a vital coalition, a novel fulcrum of influence between the Borgia and Este houses. The formal annals of that evening furnished the juridical and geopolitical corroboration requisite for both lineages. Alfonso's stamina and equanimity affirmed not solely his virility, but his mental fortitude. To execute under such duress demanded the identical rigor he exhibited in martial command. Lucrezia, in turn, manifested the tenacious instincts that had preserved her amid treachery and carnage. Collectively, they had alchemized a hazardous ordeal into victory. This evening of witnessed, inscribed, and hallowed passion transcended affection. It embodied statecraft. It embodied supremacy. Lucrezia's capacity to metamorphose vulnerability into authority, employing her form as a safeguard against political annihilation, established a benchmark that resonated throughout the Renaissance. The scrupulous notations penned by the official envoy transcended mere tittle-tattle or infamy. They constituted a compulsory manuscript, a credential of lineage authenticity capable of shielding the Este Borgia merger for eras. Embedded within those folios resided a warranty against annulment, against schemes to erode the union, against the pretexts adversarial powers frequently invoked to initiate martial or diplomatic offensives. That night of the 2nd of February, 1502, engendered a novel archetype. Henceforth, inscribed multiple consummations ceased to be an aberration, emerging as the norm for authenticating paramount political mergers. The sovereign bedchamber no longer represented a mere private domain. It was a judiciary, a platform, and a combat zone where erotic execution itself decreed the destinies of realms. As dawn ascended on the 3rd of February, two figures had undergone transmutation. No longer mere consort and spouse, Lucrezia and Alfonso arose as designers of an emergent political landscape. Their adept fulfillment of the dynastic rite bestowed upon the coalition a bedrock so robust that it would undulate across Italy for generations, demonstrating to the world that desire, when strategically harnessed, could serve as the keenest implement in a sovereign's repository. The echoes extended well beyond Ferrara's fortress ramparts. What originated as a secluded rite now constituted a geopolitical convulsion. Adversaries who had beseeched for the Union's disintegration found themselves impotent before documented attestation. They could no longer disparage Lucrezia as a sullied instrument or Alfonso as a commonplace warrior. The chronicle endured as unimpeachable verification. This merger was both legitimate and indissoluble. Virtually instantaneously, Lucrezia's stature within the Este tribunal evolved. No longer an endured interloper, she became indispensable. Her continuance was now inextricably linked to the dynasty's perpetuity. Her demise would precipitate turmoil. Thus, her existence assured equilibrium. For the inaugural instance, she was inviolable. Alfonso likewise ascended fortified. His enactment had validated not merely potency but endurance amid adversity. Where other aristocratic successors had stumbled, mortified by dissolutions or insinuations of insufficiency, Alfonso had prevailed. His stature as Ferrara's authentic inheritor, transitioned from conjecture to axiom. Yet jubilation was not universal. Isabella d'Este, who had perpetually dominated courtly existence as the preeminent luminary, now confronted a perilous contender. Lucrezia's triumph had elevated her from quarry to potency. The antagonism between the two women, already fraught from their initial convergence at Malalbero, now erupted into a covert conflict. Ferrara transformed into a venue for cerebral skirmishes, nuanced motions, murmured calumnies, subdued competitions for sway that would delineate the court for years henceforth. The coalition also reconfigured Italy's geopolitical terrain. France, Spain, and competing duchies were compelled to recognize the Este Borgia nexus as a unified dominion bloc. Diplomatic reckonings pivoted. Accords, commerce pathways, and martial tactics necessitated revision around the reality that the Borgias and Estes had seamlessly amalgamated. Yet, governance was not the sole arena. On the 5th of September 1502, Lucrezia delivered a stillborn daughter following agonized throes. Speculations ignited forthwith. Was the progeny engendered on the bridal eve or prior, during her clandestine liaisons with Alfonso antecedent to Ferrara? Analysts fixated upon the chronology, for paternity transcended the personal, it constituted political substantiation of authenticity. Lucrezia herself teetered on mortality's brink, afflicted by puerperal fever. Innumerable women succumbed. Her convalescence was perceived by contemporaries as celestial endorsement, attestation of her vigor and affirmation that she could yet yield successors. But the tribulation altered her. Confronting oblivion in parturition tempered her conviction that perseverance in this realm demanded more than elegance or compliance. It demanded stratagem. This heightened acuity propelled her along another hazardous trajectory. Approximately a year thereafter, she embarked upon a liaison with Francesco Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua, and spouse to her acrimonious adversary, Isabella d'Este. It was an entanglement spawned not solely from fervor, but from deliberation. By electing Isabella's consort, Lucrezia assailed her rival's dignity while procuring an additional stratum of political safeguard. The bond was assiduously concealed, yet its repercussions were cataclysmic. Epistles between Lucrezia and Francesco, unearthed centuries subsequently, disclose both sincere sentiment and geopolitical astuteness. She was not merely orchestrating him. She discovered in Francesco an authentic rapport, yet one that functioned as collateral against her foes. Her prowess in equilibrating this dalliance while upholding her matrimony to Alfonso evinced the expertise she had cultivated in erotic statecraft. She transcended mere endurance. She was a tactician, interlacing networks of closeness and fidelity that could insulate her from any peril. For Isabella, the liaison proved ruinous. To forfeit courtly ascendancy was tolerable, but to cede her husband's regard to Lucrezia constituted an assault both intimate and geopolitical. The enmity that ensued would shadow Ferrara's court for decades. For Isabella d'Este, the disclosure that her spouse had succumbed to her most vehement antagonist transcended mortification. It was a geopolitical calamity. Courtly murmurs metamorphosed into barbs. The very figure she endeavored to belittle had retaliated with the armament Isabella herself had honed influence via desire. Lucrezia had not only requited herself, but she had redefined the contest, illustrating that intimacy could be militarized as efficaciously as legions. Her entanglement with Francesco Gonzaga, perpetuated for years, emerged as a novel paradigm of Renaissance erotic diplomacy. These were not ephemeral amours, they were strategic augmentations of governance. Aristocratic liaisons evolved into safeguards, broadening one's lattice of protection akin to how realms diversified their coalitions. Other exalted houses promptly emulated, fabricating their own matrices of paramours and confidants as barriers against perfidy and banishment. Concurrently, the legitimate progeny Lucrezia bore to Alfonso solidified her station beyond contention. Each nativity was tangible attestation that the validation rite of her bridal eve had triumphed. With every offspring, she was no longer merely accommodated, she was essential. The Este dynasty's endurance was bound inextricably to her form, her tenacity, and her capacity to furnish continuity. Her metamorphosis was profound. Once an instrument ensnared in the merciless dynamics of dynastic matrimony, Lucrezia had transfigured into a shaper of her own providence. She converted the susceptibilities of her sex into implements of authority, demonstrating that ingenuity could harmonize with perseverance. Where others were fractured by fate, she subdued it. The bridal eve of the 2nd of February and the repositories it bequeathed persist as one of the most intricate portals into the authentic mechanics of Renaissance matrimonial statecraft. Divest the idyllic robes and lyrical oaths, and what endures is unadorned computation, unions forged not for affection but for supremacy, consummations orchestrated and inscribed to avert dissolution, erotic protocols contrived to embed coalitions in the incontrovertible. The archetype innovated by the Borgias and Estes proliferated. Inscription coupled with consummation became the equation for impervious coalitions. Even posthumously, their scions inherited not merely territories, but a methodology, a dispassionate, meticulous framework wherein the boudoir was as pivotal to governance as the fray. Lucrezia's evolution from instrument to authority wielder endures as one of the most compelling exemplars in European annals of a woman claiming volition in a realm contrived to obliterate her. She evidenced that intellect, valor, and calculated intimacy could contort the precepts of an ostensibly immutable order. And yet, her narrative constitutes merely one fragment of a concealed tapestry. Europe's repositories harbor innumerable analogous enigmas, ceremonies interred because they unveil verities too provocative for the sanctioned chronicle. Sovereigns, duchesses, and courtesans brandished desire as an armament, every iota as decisive as statecraft or warfare. Were you aware that Catherine de' Medici refined a regimen of allure that enabled her to command 3 French monarchs? That Anne Boleyn's command of amorous politics fractured England's Catholic cohesion and engendered a novel faith? That Isabella of Castile secured Spain's consolidation by directing a consummation so exhaustively attested that it necessitated 5 formal envoys? These women were never inert. They were formidable contenders in a lethal pursuit, recasting precepts from within opulent confines. If this insight into Lucrezia's domain has discomposed you, if it has revealed that history's most prescribed verities are infinitely more captivating than the expurgated legends, then you have merely grazed the exterior. Concealed within Europe's clandestine repositories are comprehensive systems of boudoir statecraft that reforged empires. The annals yet harbor mysteries, and you stand poised to unearth them. We entreat you to endorse and affiliate with this channel. We shall reconvene in the subsequent exposition.